Family disowned me 7 years later. They want me back 15 years ago. I was on top of the world. At 20 years old, I was about to start my final year in college, preparing myself for law or business school. I was on the baseball team, maintaining a high GPA, and had the full support of my parents. My extended family was filled with successful people, entrepreneurs, lawyers, and business-minded individuals. Life felt good, comfortable, and safe. I thought I was destined for success, and nothing could have convinced me otherwise. But it only took one moment for everything to come crashing down. It was an ordinary day, following a baseball practice, when I checked my phone. I had hundreds of missed calls and texts, ranging from urgent, pick up now, to you monster. I thought it was a prank at first, some sick joke. But as I scrolled through the messages, panic began to set in. Something was wrong, something I couldn't yet grasp. I stepped outside to call my mom, but as soon as she picked up, she was screaming at me. The words she said made no sense, only fueling my confusion. It sounded like she was accusing me of something, but I had no idea what it could be. My heart started to race. Suddenly, I saw my uncle charging toward me, his face twisted in rage. Before I could process it, he punched me square in the face. The force of it knocked me back, and blood began pouring from my nose. I stumbled, my vision blurry from the shock and pain. But before I could react, my father stepped in and restrained my uncle. My father looked at me with disgust, as if he didn't even recognize me. "Get home," he muttered through clenched teeth, shoving me away from my uncle, who was still screaming threats. The drive back to my parents' house was agonizing. My nose was broken, my eyes swollen, and my mind raced with confusion. What had I done to deserve this? What had happened in my family that would lead to such an explosion of anger? I didn't know where to begin to figure it out, but I knew it wasn't good. The road ahead seemed endless. When I arrived, the atmosphere was suffocating. The air in the house was thick with tension. My parents' house, which had always felt like a place of comfort and safety, now felt like a cold, hostile environment. My entire family was gathered in the living room, their faces a mix of anger, disbelief, and sorrow. My mother was crying, her hands wringing together as she screamed at me, asking why I had done it. But I had no idea what it was. What could I have possibly done to make everyone turn on me like this? The accusations came fast and furious. My cousin Amy, who had been 12 at the time, claimed that I had assaulted her during a 4th of July party earlier that year. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. It felt like the ground had been pulled out from under me. I denied it. I pleaded with them to listen to me, but no one believed me. My father, enraged, punched me in the gut. The wind was knocked out of me, and I fell to my knees, gasping for air. He yelled at me to leave, and before I could even process the overwhelming emotions crashing over me, he was throwing my clothes into garbage bags. I stood there, stunned, as my father's words echoed in my head. "Leave, now. You're not welcome here anymore." The very people I thought would always stand by me had abandoned me in an instant. I was shattered. I had no idea where to turn, who to trust. The people who knew me best, who I had loved and trusted with all my heart, were now the ones who believed the lies about me. The accusations were so ridiculous, so impossible, but the damage had already been done. With my broken nose, swollen face, and no place to go, I loaded my things into my old van, the same van my parents had given me for transporting my baseball gear. It had once been a symbol of the love and support I had always felt from them. But now, it was the only thing I had left. I called a few teammates, desperate to find somewhere to crash for the night. They offered me their couches, but I knew they were just as confused as I was. I tried calling my family again, but no one answered. For a week, I heard nothing. Finally, my father sent me a text telling me to leave them alone, calling me a monster and saying he hoped I rotted in hell. His words struck me deeper than anything physical could have. My father, my hero, had disowned me. It's impossible to describe the heartbreak that comes with losing your family. It was a cold numbness that seeped into my bones. I couldn't understand how something so monumental could happen overnight, without warning, without any chance for me to explain myself. The world I had known, the world that had been so full of promise, had turned into a nightmare. A few weeks later, the university called to inform me that my tuition was due. My parents had always helped with the payments, but now they had blocked me from contacting them. With little savings left, I had to quit the baseball team and find a full-time job to pay the remaining balance. I worked an overnight shift at a dead-end job, living in my van through the brutal winter. The cold winds cut through the walls of my van, but the emotional coldness I felt was far worse. I was surviving, but barely. Somehow, I managed to graduate, but there was no one there to celebrate with me. No family to cheer me on. No friends to share the joy of that achievement. It felt empty, like an accomplishment that had no meaning. I had earned my degree, but I had lost everything that truly mattered. That night, sitting alone in my van, I broke down. I had nowhere to go, no one to turn to. I bought multiple bottles of whiskey, desperate to numb the pain. It was all I had left. I spiraled into a dark place, one I didn't know how to escape from. For the next 2 years, I bounced from jobs to jobs. My mental health deteriorated. Whiskey and drugs became my closest companions. I trusted no one. I avoided children at all costs, terrified that anyone who saw me would think I was the monster my family had labeled me. Every day was a battle to survive, a struggle to hold on to something resembling hope. But the longer I lived like this, the harder it became to see any future at all. Summers and winters blended into one long blur. The van became my prison, and every day felt like a test of endurance. It's a miracle I didn't freeze to death or succumb to the elements. I lived in constant fear, wondering if I would ever get out of this dark place. The emotional scars of that day, the betrayal, the abandonment, were far worse than the physical injuries. I couldn't escape the feeling that my life had been stolen from me. Then, one day, my van broke down. The heat and air conditioning that had kept me safe were gone. The harsh winter winds cut through the metal like a blade, and I knew I couldn't go on like this anymore. I was desperate. I had nothing left. One night, I found myself standing on the roof of an apartment complex, looking down at the street below. The cold wind whipped through me, and for the first time in months, I felt like I was finally ready to end it all. I closed my eyes, praying for the pain to end, hoping that no one would notice. I was ready to disappear, but then I heard a voice behind me, soft, yet urgent. "Stop." I turned, and there she was, a woman, running toward me with a look of fear in her eyes. She begged me to climb down. At first, my mind was a jumble of conflicting emotions, my body frozen in place. But there was something in her eyes, some deep, quiet understanding that made me hesitate. I reached out, and with her help, I climbed down from the roof, collapsing into her arms. She didn't judge me. She didn't condemn me. She simply held me as I cried, as I let go of all the pain I had carried for so long. That moment was the turning point. It didn't fix everything, but it gave me a glimmer of hope, a small spark in the darkness. With her help, I began to rebuild my life. Slowly, painfully, but with determination, I started to crawl out of the hole I had fallen into. It wasn't easy, and it wasn't quick, but for the first time in years, I felt like I had a chance. I may never get back what I lost, but that moment reminded me that even in the darkest of times, there's always the possibility of light. I stared at the phone for a few moments, the voicemail notification blinking as though it were taunting me. Part of me wanted to just delete it, to shut out the ghosts of my past for good. But another part, the part I thought I had buried deep, felt a knot tightening in my chest. I had spent years trying to distance myself from them, but they were still there, haunting me. I tapped the screen and reluctantly pressed play. Op, please answer the phone. We need to speak. We miss you. I miss you. Please don't shut us out. I felt a rush of anger rise in me, the familiar bitter taste of betrayal seeping back into my veins. How dare she? After everything that had happened, after all the years of silence, now she wanted to talk? Now she wanted me to listen? I shut the phone off, unable to deal with it in that moment. My hands were shaking. I stood up from my desk, pacing around the office, my mind racing. Rachel was at home, probably waiting for me to tell her about the call. But I didn't want to tell her. Not yet. I couldn't bring myself to explain how a simple phone call had shattered the peace I had fought so hard to build. The memories came flooding back, clearer than ever. The harsh words, the accusations, the betrayal. It wasn't just my mother. It was my entire family, the ones who had turned their backs on me without question, without a second thought. They had believed the worst about me. No one had stood up for me. Not once. They had decided who I was, and nothing I said or did mattered. I could still hear my mother's voice in my head, her tearful pleas when I left home. You're making a mistake, Opie. Don't throw everything away. You're throwing us away. But I had to. I had no choice. They didn't see me. Not truly. They saw the version of me they had made up in their heads, the one they could easily discard when it suited them, and that was something I could never forgive. I took a deep breath, trying to calm myself. I couldn't let this destroy everything I had built with Rachel. She was my anchor, my safe place. She had saved me in more ways than I could count, and I wasn't going to let my past tear us apart. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that I had to face it. I had to confront it, once and for all. That night, when I got home, Rachel could tell something was wrong. She always could. She didn't ask right away, but sat down next to me on the couch, her hand resting gently on mine. Opie, what happened? She asked softly, her eyes full of concern. I sighed, feeling the weight of the world on my shoulders. My mother called today, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. I don't know what to do, Rach. I thought I was done with them. She didn't say anything right away. She just listened, as she always did. But I could see the worry in her eyes. She had been there for me when no one else had, and I knew how much this hurt her too. I don't want to go back there, I continued. I don't want to open that door again. It's been so long. They don't deserve me. Rachel squeezed my hand, her thumb gently stroking my skin. Opie, she said, her voice steady. I know what they did to you. I know what they took from you. But that doesn't mean you have to carry it forever. You don't have to forgive them, but you can take back control. You're not the same person you were. You're strong now. Her words hit me like a punch to the gut, but in the best way possible. I had been running from my past, burying it deep inside me, thinking that if I ignored it long enough, it would go away. But Rachel was right. I couldn't keep running. I had to face it. I had to reclaim my life, not just for me, but for her and for the family we were building together. Over the next few days, I wrestled with the decision. I didn't know what I would say to my mother. I didn't know if I could even stomach hearing her voice again. But I knew I couldn't keep hiding. The anger and resentment had been eating me alive, and it wasn't fair to Rachel or to myself. Finally, I decided to call her back. My heart was pounding in my chest as I dialed the number. It rang once, twice, and then I heard her voice. "Opie?" she said, her voice trembling. "Opie, I'm so glad you called. I've been waiting for this moment for so long." I wanted to hang up right there, but I forced myself to stay on the line. "What do you want?" I asked, my voice cold. I need to explain. I need you to understand. We were wrong about you. I was wrong, and I'm sorry. I've been so sorry." I shook my head, my hands clenched into fists. "Sorry doesn't fix what you did, Mom. You took everything from me. You believed the lies. You made me feel like I wasn't even human." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. For a moment, I thought she had hung up, but then she spoke again, quieter this time. "I know, and I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't deserve that. But I want to try. I want to make things right, if you'll let me." I closed my eyes, trying to hold back the tears that threatened to spill. It was too much. After all these years, I didn't know how to feel. Could I forgive her? Could I let her back into my life? "I don't know," I whispered. "I really don't know if I can." There was a long silence before she spoke again. "OP, I understand. I just want you to know that I love you. I always have." I hung up the phone before I could say anything else. My heart was racing, my mind spinning. What did this mean? Could I let her back in? Could I ever trust her again? I walked into the kitchen, where Rachel was sitting, waiting for me. Her eyes searched my face as she saw the storm brewing inside me. "I talked to her," I said, my voice shaking. Rachel didn't say anything, just stood up and wrapped her arms around me. I let myself lean into her, feeling her warmth and comfort. For the first time in years, I felt like maybe, just maybe, I could start healing. But it would take time. I wasn't ready to forgive my mother yet. But I wasn't going to let her dictate my life anymore. It was my choice, my life. As Rachel held me, I made a vow to myself. I would not let my past define me. I would keep moving forward. For her, for our family, for me. And no matter what happened, I would always remember the strength that had gotten me this far, the strength that had saved me in the first place. And as I looked into Rachel's eyes, I knew I wasn't alone anymore. Together, we would face whatever came next.